Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you may be. I think we'll get started as others trickle in. My name is Leonard Waverman. I'm a professor of finance and business economics at the Haas School of Business, McMaster University, and former dean, and kind of the acting director of the Foresight Lab. Let me talk for a moment about the Foresight Lab. Foresight is not forecasting. The future is not predetermined and it's not predictable, but future outcomes clearly are influenced by our own actions, either individually or as firms. And so the science of foresight is how do we look for those signals and for those issues that are becoming important or could be really critical over in 5 to 10 years. We're not looking short term, we're looking long term. And there is a science behind it. And there are a number of institutes, Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, Major Institute at Oxford, and we at McMaster are within the business school starting our own Foresight Lab. We have today our fourth webinar, which is on an issue which is critical to Canada and Canadians and other people around the world. In Canada, it's becoming winter, so we talk a lot about it's cold. We talk a lot about COVID, and we always talk about why are we so poor at R&D and commercialization as a country. It's really, we need to stop talking and having more action. And so today we have with us two distinguished gentlemen, Ian Delaney as the moderator. Ian was the founder and CEO of Sheridan International, which many of you know for its activities in Cuba, but it's much better known as being a patent mega firm with 6,500 patents, critical patents, in oil and mining. So Ian has always been a person interested in founding intellectual property and companies. He will introduce David. And so we can then go on into a discussion. David will have about a half hour or a little more, and then we'll open up to questions on the critical subject to Canada about innovation, commercialization. And remember the role, why are we doing this at university? Universities do basic research. We are the foundations of research, the foundations of what should be happening in the economy. And therefore our role is critical. But our role as universities is not good enough. We have huge citations, but we do not follow up in many ways to grow firms. And then when we grow firms, we grow them a certain size and then they're taken over. The Canadian dilemma shared by a number of other countries. I will now turn it over to Ian and David.
Thank you, Len, and good morning to our audience. I would like to introduce David Teece, who is the Thomas W. Tusher Professor in Global Business at the University of California Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. He's also the faculty director of the school's Tusher Center for the Management of Intellectual Capital. He is the author of over 30 books and 200 scholarly papers and co-editor of the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Strategic Management. David has received 8 honorary degrees and has been recognized by Royal Honors. So I'm going to ask David to begin, and I remind our audience that at the conclusion of David's remarks, there's a method for asking questions in your website, and we'll try and stick handle as many questions as we can in our time available. So please let me welcome David Teece. And David, over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and it's a delight to talk to folks at McMaster and in the broader community. I know initially my talk was about intangible assets, and it still is about intangible assets, but I've rebooted it to focus on the way in which the university's intangible assets can get used by society at large. And of course, that's through commercialization activities, amongst others. So we're going to think about the position of the university in today's society and in the economy to address what Len indicated, which is, how does Canada increase its research productivity and the generation of new firms and new enterprises that create prosperity for all? And in that process, we should never lose sight of the fact that great research universities are above all committed to the independent truth-seeking inquiry of its faculty. And what I'm going to say today about the need to get involved in commercial activities does not in any way distract from the fundamental role of the university. The university is not a business enterprise, but that's not to say it can't have entrepreneurial faculty. In fact, it should have entrepreneurial faculty that are trying to have broader impact on society and on the economy with their activities. So I simply want to point out that the universities are very important institutions for society as creators, as connectors, as places to reflect, as places to look forward. That's what your Foresight Initiative is all about. But we should also recognize that is beyond the scope of just doing research and teaching. It involves more than just research and teaching, and that these activities do have broader impacts and implications for the community. The particular focus today is on how universities can convert their intangible assets that the universities are afflicted by what economists Bill Baumol called the Baumol paradox, namely low productivity. That whereas the manufacturing sector, the technology sector has leapt ahead over the years, higher education has not shown increases in productivity. Just like the performing arts, it's been at the low end of the spectrum in terms of productivity. And so that's something that university administrators and leaders must address. Next, please, Andrea. Now, the discussion we're having today is thousands of years old. The discussion about the role of the university in society, the Socrates and Plato and Aristotle thought the university should be primarily about philosophy, but there are others that had a more applied view from the very beginning, but they were typically thought of as sophists. So it's taken a long time for universities to recognize that having impact on society beyond just simply ideas is part of the role of the university. Next slide, please. I'm actually a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the most influential people on education in North America was Benjamin Franklin. And he was a Renaissance person that covered many of the sciences, but he was also very applied and very hands-on. And he pointed out that one of the key roles of the university was actually to train students for agriculture and commerce, while at the same time being able to explore science. The primary role of the university was in the service of mankind. And in many ways, the land-grant universities in the United States took their inspiration from Benjamin Franklin. And of course, the University of California was one of those land-grant universities. Next slide, please. The proposition to look at here today is, if I may say so, I don't think universities in the main are very well managed. And I'm not a sole voice in this regard. Richard Syart, who was within a whisker of winning the Nobel Prize in economics and was part of the Carnegie School with Herbert Simon back in the 1960s, pointed out in the 80s that better management and strategic planning are essential to the continued strength of our colleges and universities. James March, his co-author, said at the time that the way at least American universities were run was organized chaos. And while that might sound amusing, and in part is true, I don't think it's any longer acceptable, even though part of the creative process is chaotic, I think universities need to be properly administered and well led from the top. Next slide, please. Now, as I indicated, I'm not the only one to make this point, but few universities have really taken it all that seriously. And the opportunity and the need exists, in particular, in my view, for faculty leaders to think about research, not just for its own good, but in terms of impact. Now, impact is a very broad term. And of course, it can be impact on science itself, which is a primary role, but it could be impact on society and the way we live and on the marketplace. So I think if there's one word that you can take away from today, it's that the universities need to analyze and think systematically about how to have more impact. And of course, I'm referring to positive impact. There are ways in which the university can have negative impact on society too, but ways in which you can have more positive impact, which is somewhat broader than just simply contributing to the world stock of knowledge. Contributing to the world stock of knowledge, yes, but in a way that has beneficial impact for society and the economy. Next slide, please. The modern university, of course, isn't all that modern in some ways. It has many medieval vestiges, and I personally like some of the trappings of campus. We have deans and not CEOs, and some deans are more like CEOs than others. I would say, at least in the United States, and if I can talk about business schools and the social sciences, Berkeley is probably the campus which is most faculty led, and maybe Harvard anchors the other extreme where deans have a lot more authority and power. And I'm not necessarily saying that one or the other is better. In fact, one of the great strengths of UC Berkeley is that it's faculty led. But at the same time, while it's being faculty led, it needs to be co-led by deans and by university presidents who have a vision for the future and can obtain the resources that are necessary to achieve those goals. So we need to look at each one of these trappings of the past and ask ourselves, should we be doing things the same way we always have to make the university fit for purpose for the future? Next slide, please. Now, another big point that I'm going to make is innovation, entrepreneurship on and around campus complement the role of the university as a research institution. I know when I first came to Berkeley in the 80s, it wasn't articulated this way, but I think most faculty thought they were substitutes. That if faculty were doing entrepreneurial things, that meant they weren't serious researchers. In fact, I was very much involved myself in entrepreneurial activities, and I shut my mouth and didn't talk about them because I know that with many other faculty, that would have led to an immediate assumption that I'm not a serious scholar. But in my view, truly serious scholars do care about impact and can have impact. Not all of them, but some of them can. And we shouldn't close that door. In fact, it's critical to keep that door open. And I also believe that the university should not favor commercial and entrepreneurial values over research and instruction, but at the same time, nor should it marginalize those views. And the reason for that is, as I've indicated, but there's actually strong evidence now to support the fact that faculty who are excellent in research are also excellent in outreach and external activities. The greatest professors are good at both. And it's striking when you look at the data, not all, but many. And my next table actually has some data that's been published. It was actually done by one of my doctoral students that shows that faculty who are involved in entrepreneurial activities or take time out to get involved in entrepreneurial activities, their publication rates go up rather than down as a result of that activity. So there's no doubt that there is emerging evidence to bolster my claim that entrepreneurship on campus done correctly actually complements and improves the overall research activity, let alone building the commercial base and the resource base of the university. So I'm no longer mouthing platitudes here. I believe the evidence is strongly behind the view that there is benefit to creating mechanisms for faculty to express entrepreneurial capabilities, if in fact they have them, and many don't, but some do. Next slide, please. I'm now echoing work by John Darby and Lynn Zucker, and they both say that it's commonly thought, especially among academics, that the very best scientists are unlikely to be involved with firms or to patent their discoveries. And what I'm saying is the evidence now suggests the contrary. Next slide, please. They actually have a framework which makes it quite clear that affiliated scientists with patents are cited 6.5 times more frequently than scientists who are not tied to some other relationship. So academic productivity goes up as connections to industry goes up. And those of you that are interested can follow up that literature. Next slide, please. Now, I've actually taken this, Lynn pointed out that I'm an active scholar, and one of the things I've actually studied is this phenomena because it interests me personally. I've actually done 3 startups myself, which include 2 IPOs. I took my own appointment down to 50% in order to be able to do that. But I went around and talked to a number of university presidents, including President Hennessy at Stanford, as have others. And Hennessy points out, because Stanford, of course, and MIT, and do anchor the profile of the most entrepreneurial universities in the world. Hennessy points out the entrepreneurial spirit is part of the university's foundation, and that's true at Stanford. And that, ironically, is true because Stanford didn't start with a very munificent resource base. They are actually scratching for resources. They actually had a very modest endowment 50 years ago. They were a regional university, not a national, not a global university. And it's actually out of that de minimis resource base that I think the entrepreneurial spirit came. It came as of necessity. But others point out that the essential ingredient is the attitude that business is a partner to be embraced, not kept at arm's length. Next slide, please. It's not to say that as the university becomes more entrepreneurial, that there aren't significant detractors. David Kennedy, for one, has been very critical, and to some extent, you might say rightly so. He's been critical that many students have unintentionally incorporated the excesses of Silicon Valley into their campus life. And yes, indeed, some have, but most have not. He goes on to say that it's in an atmosphere that can be toxic to the mission of the university if people and students are too focused on commercial outcomes. And I agree, but it need not be that way. That's why this is a very careful balance. But my sense is at McMaster, you're nowhere near where Stanford is, and perhaps need to move a little bit more over in terms of engagement with outside partners. Next slide, please. Now, if I can talk about my own campus, University of California, Berkeley, I would say over the last 30 years, it's gone through a very significant transition. In fact, in the time period that I've been on the faculty. And we, of course, are not without folks that have had big impact. Ed Penno was the founder of Chiron Corporation. And back then, he pointed out that while there had been a long tradition, at least in the engineering school, of people being involved in consulting, there wasn't really much in the way of enterprise development, but that has now changed, and there's a much more positive attitude towards that activity on campus. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. But while that's true, this is a comment that was given to me by one of my colleagues who was himself very active in entrepreneurship, and it's a comment on where our culture was 8 years ago. He says, our culture is changing slowly, but the faculty are still shy to talk about their startups, even though almost every faculty member is involved in quite a number. And I can certainly verify the authenticity of that. In a way, the University of California does allow folks to be involved in entrepreneurship, but there is a significant group of faculty that are very ambivalent. And so what that does is it forces a fair amount of underground entrepreneurial activity, which is not the best outcome for the university, in my view. Next slide, please. What needs to change? I think this is where campus leadership needs to come in. And campus leadership needs to say, it's okay to be entrepreneurial, not just okay to be entrepreneurial. If you do it the right way, it's actually desirable, and it's in alignment with the basic purposes of the university. And such faculty shouldn't be faced with as many barriers as they do. They get yes rarely from the university campus for requests, and they hear no very often. So what I think is needed here is actually a cultural shift and a better understanding on campus of the role of entrepreneurship in general in society and the importance of new enterprise development, not just for the economy, but for the university. Next slide, please. And you see this has already happened. There's a lot of VC activity around most of the US institutions. This data is a little dated. You could probably double these numbers today. And in fact, UC Berkeley has come up quite a bit on this matrix. But almost every great research university in the United States has got a fair amount of venture capital activity going on around it. And I think at UC Berkeley, we have like 20 to 30 different incubators of one kind or another. So venture capital has also figured out the university is a place to go to look for new ideas, and in particular, to look for new ideas that are big ideas. And I'll be coming back to that theme in a moment. Next slide, please. Now, historically, this activity has been handled by what we call technology transfer offices. But, you know, the technology transfer office is, in my view, a little bit of a relic of the past. That's when the main way in which technology would move off campus would be through licensing arrangements of one kind or another. So if there was patenting, you know, a faculty member might have an invention patented, but nothing much more would be done except that you would hope that someone come along and take a license. But we know that it's a big jump from invention through to commercialization. And so the technology transfer offices have not really assisted in that, because the type of people they have are typically being folks without much commercial savvy and don't have the ability to actually understand the potential implications or the commercial implications of various technologies. So technology transfer offices are in the process of changing. And I know at the UC Berkeley that's happening, but it's not happened as fast as it should, in my mind. Next slide, please. Can you hear me, Lynn? There are other barriers to.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm getting a funny noise here, but I imagine that'll kill itself sooner or later. There are other barriers to campus entrepreneurship besides the fact that many technology transfer officers are a little bit ossified. That universities need to have policies to enable faculty to take leaves of absence to do this kind of work. And in addition, you know, while we have conflicts of interest policies and conflicts of commitment policies, we also need to be supportive in encouraging faculty to do this kind of work. And I can say that most deans of engineering have got this, at least in North America, they have. They've got it now. They didn't have it in the past, but they've got it now. Next slide, please. So unnecessary barriers need to be removed. And in my view, there needs to be at least symbolic support for this kind of activity, instead of essentially tiptoeing around the issue. I think it's time for deans to come out and for university presidents to come out and talk about the fact that that you almost have a duty. You must have a duty if you're an inventor to do something with it, particularly if it's an important invention. I'll come back to this later, but faculty promotion criteria should, in my view, underscore that duty. And at minimum, there should be symbolic rewards for this kind of activity, as well as, of course, sharing in whatever revenue opportunities there are. It should be recognized symbolically on campus as well. Next slide, please. And behind all of this, we have to recognize that the few academics that are good at this are likely to be your star academics across the board. And they're very precious. I say that because, the Pareto rule that, if you look at just research activity, is something like 2% of scholars do about 80%, or win about 80% of the citation awards, or the citations that are granted. So any field of science moves primarily by the leaders or by the stars. We don't know, of course, who the future stars are going to be, so that's why we're supportive of all faculty initially. But we have to recognize that it's really the star academics. Just like in software, most of the key developments come from a few leading software engineers. As in many areas of performance, it's just a few that move fields forward. All the more reason why the university should be friendly to star academics, and in particular to those that work to have impact with their inventions and with their scientific discoveries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Are we frozen again? So what are the action steps here? As I've said, for leaders, for campus leaders and administrators, I think it actually is as basic as changing the job description. A university president who's not really cognizant of these issues, particularly in a major research university like McMaster, is not the type of person that can lead the university into the future. And for faculty, you don't use entrepreneurship as a criteria for hiring folks, but at the same time, you make sure you give recognition to the great scientists, artists, and teachers, and all the others that are supreme performers. So if you can't contribute to this activity, then at least you should be supporting as a faculty member those that do, rather than trying to shoot them down. Next slide, please. So what are the new campus management priorities that come out of this? Well, of course, number one is to continue to expand support for academic research. There's nothing I've said today that says you should do less in the way of academic research, or that you should do less in the way of basic research. You should continue to do basic research. That's one of the fundamental missions of the university. And while you do that, you should also focus on enabling technologies or generic technologies that can impact many areas of society. Truly great inventions go beyond any one field of application. Things like the laser, for instance, or 5G technology, some of the foundational inventions around wireless, impact many, many different areas of the economy and of society. So there should be a new set of management priorities, in my view, and unambiguous endorsement of innovation and entrepreneurship as an integral and legitimate component of campus activity. Next slide, please. So financial support for dead-end initiatives should also be terminated. It's very important here to husband the university's resources, and that means not only providing resources for new initiatives, but being willing to close down things that are no longer productive. That's what I call sunset rules. And I think universities are often very slow at doing this and figuring out ways to assess whether a particular initiative from the past is still useful today should be part of what every good university administrator and what every good university leader is doing. Next slide, please. Now, there's perhaps one way in which this can be messaged to campus, not necessarily the way that I prefer, but you might find, depending on attitudes on campus, that this is a good way to go. And I think there's widespread acceptance that social entrepreneurship is very desirable. And I would simply point out that any new technology that has impact across multiple aspects of the economy and of society is social entrepreneurship, in the sense that it's contributing more to the social good than it is to private benefit. Economists have a very clear way of measuring social returns compared to private returns. And of course, almost every technology that's an enabling technology has high social returns. So one way to package this for messaging on campus and off campus is to call it entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. So if that helps, go that route. I don't think it changes the basic story that I'm putting forward here. And it may be something that makes the transition somewhat easier for campuses like McMaster. Only you will know. Next slide, please. And as part of this, we have to recognize that new enterprises are, this is quote Steve Jobs, an amazing instrument for doing good, or they can be. I'll address the negative side in a moment too. But it's interesting to look at somebody who is not trained in business, which is Steve Jobs, and to look at the awe that he gives, that he has for the business enterprise. The company is one of the most amazing inventions of humans, this abstract construct that's incredibly powerful. Even so, for me, it's about the product. It's about working together with really fun, smart, creative people and making wonderful things happen. So, you know, the limited liability enterprise was invented, what was it, 300-400 years ago in the United Kingdom, and we all take it for granted. And most people on the left spend a good deal of time trashing it. But as Steve Jobs points out, it's really an amazing place for creative people to work, to be shielded from liability, or at least in a limited way, and to obtain resources and to find productive ways to engage with each other. And that's a great message to put out on campus when you hear so much chatter going the other way. We need to be reminded of basic fundamentals. Next slide, please. Now, I've indicated that another way to make the social entrepreneurship idea work well is to focus on enabling technologies. This is all about focusing on things that have potential big impact across multiple avenues of inquiry and across multiple avenues of application. So let's just move on. I know I'm out of time and we need more here, more time for discussion. So Andrea, let's flick ahead fast now because I do want to see what questions there are. Next slide, please. You can flick beyond this one. I can't, you can go beyond that one. Yeah, let's pause on this one here. Let's go back to Hennessy's comments, just back one, please, which is, campus leaders shouldn't focus on any type of entrepreneurship. There's good entrepreneurship and there's not so good entrepreneurship. In fact, there's negative entrepreneurship. If you come up with a new idea to work around a government regulation, and I remember in the United States at one point we had old oil and new oil, and a guy called Mark Rich figured out how to arbitrage old oil to new oil and get a price advantage. Didn't create any societal value. This is where scholarship can come in and help craft a strategy for the university that actually focuses on directing students and faculty to the extent to which they're engaged in entrepreneurship. It directs them towards doing things that have high impact and high positive impact. So not all entrepreneurship that we favor, but certainly most. Let's go to the very last slide, please, Andrea, because I've got I've got some basic points in my very last slide that can help sum up today's talk. Next slide, please. One more. I think it's the next one. Here we are. Here's 8 points on a manifesto for McMaster. I wanted to be provocative, and so let me just walk through these. One, in my view, any good university and any great university like McMaster, which has a strong research base, should focus on continued and expanded support for academic research. There should, at the same time, be an unambiguous endorsement of innovation and entrepreneurship as an integral and legitimate component of campus activity. There should be a prioritization of research funding towards enabling technologies and increased financial and non-financial support to technology transfer and new enterprise development. There should be the sunsetting of initiatives that haven't worked out, despite the fact there may still be a few champions left. This is a tough decision, but leaders need to do that. And point 6 is one that I would put forward to all faculty members for serious consideration. Amend faculty promotion and academic advancement criteria to give affirmative permission for faculty to engage in commercial and other activities which have positive impact, including enterprise foundations. So at the University of California, Berkeley, we have research, teaching, and university service and professional service. But I would add one more, which is impact. Every faculty member should have some responsibility, along with the institution, to ensure impact. And then the streamlining of campus-initiated new enterprise development through assisted navigation of university rules. Universities are great at creating new rules, and they usually stand in the way of entrepreneurship. So finding ways to help faculty navigate this so that faculty hear yes rather than no a little bit more often. I'll just leave it there, Ian, and see if there's any comments or questions.
Good. Can we get back to a live screen then? Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, David, particularly like the manifesto slide. So from our viewing audience, we're prepared to accept questions until we get some questions up. I don't see any here yet, but let me lead off with a question, if I may, David. Is there a role here for government? Not in terms of funding, but in terms of policy. I'm thinking of, for instance, the Bayh-Dole Act in the United States of 1980 and its subsequent amendments to 86. And depending on commentators you look at, some think it's an anchor, some think it's a propeller. Do you have a view?
Well, yes, I do have a view at a very high level, which is that shouldn't be looking primarily to patent royalties as the way for the university to benefit. I would favor very much, for the government to benefit, should I say, I would favor very much the university having any royalties and for the university to split that as it wishes between faculty and the broader campus responsibilities, which is what I understand Bayh-Dole allows. I may not be 100% correct about that, but I think the more general point is that patents should be facilitating technology transfer, not getting in the way. We should see the bigger prize as being, a new enterprise, and a new enterprise that may initially have some amount of equity owned by the university, but need not. I mean, I can tell you that around Berkeley and Stanford, the folks that have contributed the most are those that have had successful enterprises. It's what they give back to the university, not what the claim the university has. I know many deans of engineering are of the view that let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then the gifting back to the university and other forms of engagement with the university are the primary ways in which the university benefits. We have to think in terms of enriching the university ecosystem, not just the university. If the university ecosystem is enriched, then so is the university. And if I'd had more time, I would have talked about that.
Thank you. We have a question from Darren here. What role should external stakeholders, industry community, play in setting priorities for the institution with regards to commercialization and entrepreneurship?
Well, I think that external stakeholders are important here, that sometimes university leaders need a bit of nudging. The message that I'm putting forward here, I think, is being accepted by a lot of universities, but not by all. So nudging university leadership in the direction of legitimizing entrepreneurial activity on and around campus is very important. And the external constituents can be very, very helpful in that, particularly with respect to the off-campus ecosystem, but also with respect to the on-campus ecosystem.
Okay, there's no other question showing up here on my screen at the moment. But
let me ask you a question.
Go ahead, Len.
So, David, you talked a lot about Stanford versus Berkeley, and it was, I think it's all about culture. And culture, as you know, is very difficult to change. And so when you look at, when I start off by talking about Canada, we seem to have a culture which does not recognize entrepreneurship generally, unlike, for example, Israel or maybe Stanford. So at McMaster, where do we begin? How do we foster more of what your manifesto? How do we get that underway? And we know it'll take time, but and also, what's the first? What would you do at first to foster a more innovative culture?
Well, let me address that in a very specific way, because we have exactly that problem in the broader Berkeley ecosystem, where we have one of the most anti-business governments in the world, which is the city of Berkeley. But sooner or later, the city of Berkeley figured out that actually the word business didn't necessarily mean big business. It meant their friends, namely small business. And once they recognized that entrepreneurship is about creating and fostering small businesses that scale to become bigger businesses, the attitude has changed. So even the city of Berkeley now is pro-entrepreneurship, pro-innovation, despite the fact that for 40 years they trumpeted just the opposite, because they didn't understand. That the way big businesses get created and good things happen is you got to have small businesses to begin with. So I think one way is to point out that entrepreneurship empowers individuals to do good things. And I think to wrap it in the social impact mantle is one way to get started, if in fact there's resistance. But I think the other thing to do is to point out the obvious, which is, rather than, that resources are increasingly scarce, and with respect to faculty, one way to move them in the right direction is to point out that for the long-term survival of great research universities, you're not going to continue to get handouts from government forever. That this is increasing competition for resources. And if you think the university is a precious institution, you've got to be adapting. You've got to be adapting and adjusting now, not tomorrow when it's too late, but now. So appealing to stewardship and drawing the links between the resource generation capacity of new enterprise development, whether it's at one of the spectrum with licensing income, or whether it's with gifting, or whether it's with equity splitting with the campus, whatever it is, or just enriching the university's ecosystem, which will then, of course, assist the university in its basic fundamental roles. But educating folks that this is complementary, these activities are complementary to and not substitutes for what's been done in the past.
Yeah, I think the magic word is impact. That's a very critical word.
David, you mentioned in your remarks that Berkeley had come up a long way in terms of intellectual property receipt and innovation. What drove that? Was that policy driven? Was it leadership driven? Was it?
I would like to think it was somewhat faculty driven, and I'd like to think I had a role in that myself. No, I don't think it was driven by the university president's level. I think the College of Engineering have been really important and consistent advocates on our campus. I mean, UCSF is where medical technology is, and of course, UCSF is doing a fantastic job of creating new enterprises. So they're ahead of UC Berkeley in many, many ways. And they're attracting enormously largely gifts because of that. So one, recognizing that it's working very positively at places like Stanford, MIT, and UCSF. I think that's assisted, but I'd say it's largely faculty driven. And at the same time, university administrators have been quietly supportive. I think they should be more visibly supportive, but I'm quite happy that they've been quietly supportive.
Can I give a plug here for McMaster? So I stepped down as dean on June 30th, and as July 1st, I have a new role, which is special advisor to provost of VP research and the president on commercialization. So from the top, we understand the importance, and it's not driven as much. We understand the idea that the governments are tapped out. We're not getting any more money, but it's really, we are the most research intensive university in Canada, but we need more impact. We got to impact lives. Our mantra is we are here to make a brighter world, and we make a brighter world by having products and services in the marketplace. We reduce morbidity and mortality and make people better off. That's impact, and that's McMaster's view of the world.
And led to build on that, impact helps in two ways. One, it's the direct commercial activities, which benefits the university. But more importantly, when the government looks at what you're doing with the money and they see positive things, they see impact, you get more government support too. So it assists in both the private support, it assists by private, I mean contract research, it assists in giving, and it assists in getting more resources out of the government. Not always, but it gives you a lot better shot. And I believe that many universities are not paying sufficient attention to this, and their source of government funding is going to decline. With the University of California, Berkeley, when I joined the faculty in '83, the state was like 70% of our total budget. Today, it's less than 10%. Yet the university has continued to maintain greatness. And, to answer your question, Ian, there's been a little bit of necessity here. Just like Stanford started out being more entrepreneurial because it didn't have the rich public state of California funding that Berkeley had. So there's a little bit of necessity here as a mother, not just of invention, but as a mother of a more munificent and accommodating view of entrepreneurship.
And does, in several conversations in an attempt to commercialize things in universities in Canada, I find that universities all have a policy which is clear, easily understood, and never observed. If I were doing something with Berkeley, is there a style book, a guidebook, and is it easy to do business with Berkeley?
You mean if you're a faculty member or if you're outside external constituent?
Either.
Well, no, there is not enough. We have conflicts of interest handbook. We have a conflict of commitment handbook, which actually was triggered by some of my own activities. Actually, I think it's a good policy, but it's very hard to navigate the campus. And if I'd had more time, I'd point out, that there's probably 30 to 40 different places on campus where a venture capitalist may wish to go if they wanted to tap into some of the inventive and creative capacities. So it's very hard to navigate. The Technology Transfer Office does have a few individuals that have been hired with commercial backgrounds that are, I think, quite supportive and savvy these days with respect to helping to guide outside constituents, and certain deans are helpful. So maps have been drawn at Berkeley, but it's still going to be difficult. And in my view, we should be doing a lot more to make it easier for outside constituencies to understand what's going on and to know where to go to find partnerships. In fact, I've advanced the idea that we have a, let's just call it a Berkeley Science and Technology magazine or creativity magazine that's directed exactly for those purposes. But unless I do that myself, it's not going to happen.
Well,
Then I see no more
I
questions
think I'm
on
gonna
my
do that
screen.
too.
Then I see no more questions on my screen. Would you
Okay,
would you
well,
like to wrap up?
Yeah, so David, thank you for your wisdom. I know you've been working on this a long time within the university and outside, and you have multiple views of it. And you have something like 190,000 citations, which is probably more than the entire faculty at most universities. So you walk the talk. You have the citations and you have the outside activities, and they certainly are complements. And I think that's the strongest message that I take from what you said, is that commercial activity or impact, social entrepreneurship is not a substitute for research, but a complement for it. You can do both, and then you make the world better off by doing both. So I thank you for your wisdom and for being with us today. And this has been recorded, and the slides will be available to everyone. Andrea will send them out to you, or just write Andrea if you don't get it. And we thank Ian, because he's also a man who walks the walk and does the talk. So he's been fighting for better IP policy in Canada and fighting for universities to be much more transparent. So Ian, thank you for all you do for our country as well.